Sarah Mitchell pulled her Honda Civic into the gravel driveway of her childhood home in Millbrook, Tennessee. The small town looked exactly the same as it had 3 years ago when she'd left for her second deployment overseas. White picket fences lined the quiet streets, and the old oak trees still cast long shadows across the sidewalks where she used to ride her bicycle as a little girl. But Sarah was different now, very different. She sat in the car for a moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel. Her left arm ached, it always did when the weather changed, and storm clouds were gathering overhead. She flexed her fingers slowly, working through the stiffness that had become part of her daily routine. The front door of the house opened, and her mother, Linda Mitchell, stepped onto the porch. Her face broke into a smile that could have lit up the whole neighborhood. Sarah took a deep breath, grabbed her single duffel bag from the passenger seat, and stepped out of the car. Sarah, oh, honey, you're finally home. Linda rushed down the steps, her arms open wide. Sarah hugged her mother tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her lavender perfume. For a moment, she felt like that 18-year-old girl again, the one who had enlisted in the army right after high school with dreams of serving her country and seeing the world. I've missed you so much, Mum, Sarah whispered. Linda pulled back and studied her daughter's face. Sarah was thinner than before, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago. But what struck Linda most was something in Sarah's expression, a hardness, a wariness that made her look older than her 24 years. Come inside, Linda said gently. I made your favorite pot roast with mashed potatoes. As they walked toward the house, Sarah noticed old Mrs. Henderson peeking through her curtains from next door. The elderly woman had always been the neighborhood busybody, but something in her expression made Sarah uncomfortable. It wasn't the warm curiosity she remembered from childhood. It was something else. Something colder. Inside the house, everything was exactly as Sarah remembered. The same floral wallpaper in the kitchen, the same family photos on the mantelpiece, the same creak in the third step of the staircase. Her father, Tom Mitchell, emerged from his study with a newspaper still in his hand. There's my soldier girl, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He wrapped Sarah in a bear hug that made her wince slightly, though she tried to hide it. Over dinner, Sarah's parents asked careful questions about her time overseas. She gave them the same answers she'd given everyone, that she was fine, that she was glad to be home, that she was looking forward to getting back to normal life. She didn't tell them about the nightmares that still woke her up at 3 in the morning. She didn't mention the way loud noises made her heart race, and she certainly didn't talk about the day that had changed everything. So what are your plans now? Her father asked, cutting into his pot roast. Are you thinking about going back to school? Maybe using that GI Bill? Sarah pushed the food around on her plate. She'd been dreading this question. I'm not sure yet, Dad. I need some time to figure things out. Well, you don't need to rush into anything, Linda said quickly. You can stay here as long as you want. Your room is exactly how you left it. After dinner, Sarah excused herself and went upstairs to her old bedroom. The pink walls and boy band posters seemed to belong to someone else's life now. She sat on the edge of her twin bed and pulled out her phone. She had 17 missed calls from her former unit and dozens of text messages she hadn't answered. The last message was from her old squad leader, Sergeant Martinez. Sarah, you need to call me back. The investigation is moving forward, and they need your statement. Don't let them silence you. Sarah turned off the phone and tossed it onto the nightstand. She wasn't ready for any of that yet. She just wanted to disappear for a while, to pretend that none of it had ever happened. Outside her window, she could see into the Henderson house next door. Mrs. Henderson was on the phone, gesturing animatedly as she spoke. Sarah had a sinking feeling that she was the topic of conversation. The next morning, Sarah woke up to the sound of rain against her window. She dressed in jeans and a long-sleeved shirt. She always wore long sleeves. Noand went downstairs to find her mother, already up, making coffee. Good morning, sweetheart, Linda said. I thought we could go into town today. Maybe stop by Pauline's diner for lunch. You always loved their apple pie. Sarah nodded, though the thought of facing the townspeople made her stomach churn. She'd grown up in Millbrook, and everyone knew everyone else's business. By now word would have spread that Tom and Linda Mitchell's daughter was back from the war. As they drove down Main Street, Sarah noticed how many people seemed to be staring. At the post office, 3 women stopped their conversation to watch their car pass. At the gas station, a group of men looked up from their coffee and followed them with their eyes. Is it just me, or is everyone acting strange? Sarah asked. Linda's hands tightened on the steering wheel. You know how small towns are, honey. People are just curious. They haven't seen you in a long time. but Sarah could tell there was something her mother wasn't saying. The stares didn't feel curious, they felt hostile. At Pauline's diner, the hostess led them to a table near the back. Sarah noticed how the woman avoided making eye contact with her, and how the conversations at nearby tables seemed too quiet when they sat down. "I'll have the usual," Linda told the waitress, a young woman named Beth who had been 2 years behind Sarah in high school. "And for you?" Beth asked Sarah, still not looking directly at her. "Just coffee, please." After Beth walked away, Sarah leaned across the table toward her mother. "Mom, what's going on? Why is everyone acting like I have the plague?" Linda sighed and reached across to pat her daughter's hand. "Honey, there have been some rumors going around town about what happened over there." Sarah felt her blood run cold. "What kind of rumors?" "Nothing specific," Linda said quickly. "Just people talking nonsense. You know how Mrs. Henderson likes to gossip. She heard something from her nephew who works at the VA hospital in Nashville, and she's been spreading stories around town." "What kind of stories?" Linda looked uncomfortable. "Something about you being in trouble with the military. About some kind of incident that got you discharged early. People are saying you did something wrong over there." Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She'd known this day would come eventually. She'd hoped that maybe, in her small hometown, she could escape the whispers and accusations. But apparently, there was no escaping the past, no matter how far she ran. "Mum," she said quietly, "whatever you've heard, whatever people are saying, it's not true, at least, not the way they're telling it." "I know, sweetheart," Linda said firmly. "Your father and I know you would never do anything wrong. We raised you better than that." But as Sarah looked around the diner at the faces turned toward them, at the whispered conversations and sideways glances, she realized that her parents' faith in her might not be enough. In a small town like Millbrook, reputation was everything, and somehow hers had been destroyed before she'd even had a chance to defend herself. The rain continued to fall outside the diner windows, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was just beginning. The next few days passed in a blur of awkward encounters and uncomfortable silences. Every time Sarah left the house, she felt the weight of eyes upon her. At the grocery store, conversations stopped when she walked down the aisles. At the library, the elderly librarian who had known Sarah since she was a child barely acknowledged her presence. The worst part was watching how it affected her parents. Her father, who had always been proud to tell anyone who would listen about his daughter serving overseas, now seemed hesitant to mention her military service at all. Her mother tried to maintain her usual cheerful demeanor, but Sarah could see the strain in her eyes. On Thursday morning, Sarah was sitting on the front porch with her coffee when she noticed a group of women walking by on the sidewalk. She recognized them from high school: Jennifer Walsh, Michelle Stone, and Amy Crawford. They had been the popular girls back then, the ones who had never given Sarah much attention when she was the quiet, bookish girl who preferred reading to shopping. As they approached the house, their voices carried clearly in the morning air. "Heard she got kicked out for attacking her commanding officer," Jennifer was saying, not bothering to lower her voice. "My cousin works at the courthouse in Nashville," Michelle added. "He said there's going to be a court-martial. Something about her going crazy over there." "I always knew there was something off about her," Amy chimed in. "Remember how weird she was in high school, always by herself, never quite fitting in." Sarah set down her coffee cup carefully, her hands trembling slightly. She wanted to stand up, to shout at them that they didn't know what they were talking about. But something held her back, maybe pride, maybe exhaustion, or maybe just the knowledge that it wouldn't matter what she said. Their minds were already made up. The women walked past without acknowledging her, but Sarah knew they had seen her sitting there. They had wanted her to hear. That afternoon, her mother returned from her weekly bridge game, looking upset. "How was bridge?" Sarah asked, though she could already guess from her mother's expression. Linda set down her purse and sank into her favorite armchair. "Oh honey, I'm so sorry. Some of the ladies, they were asking questions about you, about what really happened over there." "What did you tell them?" "I told them it was none of their business," Linda said firmly. "But Sarah, maybe it would help if you talked about it, if people knew the truth." "Mum, stop." Sarah's voice was sharper than she intended. "I can't. Not yet. Maybe not ever." Linda reached over and took her daughter's hand. "Whatever happened over there, whatever you did or didn't do, your father and I love you. That will never change." Sarah squeezed her mother's hand, fighting back tears. If only it were that simple. If only love could erase the past, could silence the whispers, could heal the wounds that went deeper than skin. That evening, Sarah's father came home from work earlier than usual. He owned a small hardware store on Main Street. the same store his father had run before him. As he hung up his jacket, Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. "Rough day?" she asked. "Had some customers asking questions today, about you, about our family." He looked directly at his daughter. "Sarah, I need you to know that I don't care what anyone is saying. You're my daughter, and I'm proud of you. But if there's something you need to tell us, something that would help us understand what we're dealing with." Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the feeling that always came when people pressed her for details about what had happened overseas. She could feel their love, their concern, their desperate need to understand. But she couldn't give them what they wanted. "Not yet, Dad. All I can tell you is that I did my job. I followed orders, and when someone needed to be protected, I tried to protect them." Her voice cracked slightly. "Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't look like what people expect it to look like." Tom studied his daughter's face for a long moment. There was something in her eyes of pain that went beyond anything he'd ever seen before. He wanted to push for more answers, but something in her expression stopped him. "That's enough for me," he said quietly. "That's enough for both of us." But Sarah could see that it wasn't enough for the town. The next morning, she found a note tucked under the windshield wiper of her car. It was written in block letters on plain white paper. "We don't want your kind here. Leave before someone gets hurt." Sarah crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. But the message was clear. Whatever Mrs. Henderson had heard, whatever rumors were spreading through the town, they were getting worse. And Sarah was beginning to realize that she couldn't hide from the truth forever. That afternoon, she made a decision. She drove to the Millbrook Public Library and asked to use one of their computers. Her hands shook slightly as she typed in her password and accessed her military email account for the first time in weeks. The inbox was full of messages she'd been avoiding, official correspondence from the army, emails from fellow soldiers, and dozens of messages from reporters who somehow had gotten her contact information. She scrolled through them until she found what she was looking for, an email from Captain Rebecca Torres, the military lawyer who had been assigned to her case. "Sergeant Mitchell," the email read, "I know you've been avoiding my calls, but we need to talk. The preliminary hearing has been scheduled for next month, and your testimony will be crucial. What you did over there was heroic, and it's time the world knew the truth. Please call me as soon as you get this." Sarah stared at the screen for a long time. Heroic. The word felt foreign to her now. For months she'd been told she was a troublemaker, a whistleblower, someone who couldn't follow orders. She'd begun to believe it herself, but Captain Torres was right about one thing: it was time for the truth to come out. Sarah was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of letting other people define her story. If the people of Millbrook wanted to know what really happened overseas, maybe it was time to show them. She closed the email and drove home, her mind racing with possibilities. She had kept quiet for so long, protecting herself and others, following the advice of lawyers who told her to stay silent until the investigation was complete. But silence had only made things worse. It had allowed the rumors to grow, the whispers to spread, the truth to be buried under layers of speculation and gossip. As she pulled into her driveway, Sarah made herself a promise. She was done being the victim. She was done letting other people tell her story. It was time to fight back. But first, she needed to find the courage to tell her parents the truth about what had really happened in that dusty compound half a world away. On the day that changed everything, the breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon at Miller's hardware store. Sarah had offered to help her father with inventory, partly to be useful and partly to escape the suffocating atmosphere at home where her parents walked on eggshells around her. She was restocking screws in aisle 3 when she heard voices from the front of the store. Male voices, loud and aggressive. "I'm telling you, Tom, you need to do something about your daughter," came the voice of Bill Crawford, Amy's father and one of the town's most vocal residents. "People are talking, and it's not good for business." "What people are saying is none of my concern," her father replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. "And it's certainly none of yours." "Come on, Tom, be reasonable," added another voice. Sarah recognized it as Pastor Williams from the First Baptist Church. "The girl comes back from overseas with some kind of dark cloud hanging over her head. People have a right to know if there's a danger in their community." Sarah crept closer to the front of the store, staying hidden behind a display of paint cans. Through the gaps, she could see 3 men confronting her father at the counter: Bill Crawford, Pastor Williams, and Jim Martinez, not her old squad leader, but a local man who happened to share the same last name. "A danger." Her father's voice was incredulous. "Are you listening to yourselves? This is my daughter we're talking about. The same girl who used to babysit your kids, Pastor Williams." The same girl who organized the food drive for the homeless shelter 3 years running. That was before, Bill Crawford said firmly, before whatever happened over there changed her. My wife heard from reliable sources that she attacked a superior officer, that she's got some kind of ... mental problems now. Sarah felt her blood boiling, but she forced herself to stay hidden. She needed to hear this. And what reliable sources would those be? Her father demanded. Betty Henderson's gossip network. Give me a break. Pastor Williams leaned forward, his voice taking on the tone he used in his sermons. Tom, I'm not trying to cause trouble, but I have a responsibility to my congregation. If this girl is unstable, if she's capable of violence, get out. The words came from Sarah's mouth before she realized she had spoken. She stepped out from behind the paint display, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. All 4 men turned to stare at her. Her father's eyes were wide with surprise and concern. The other 3 men looked like they'd been caught doing something shameful, which Sarah thought they had been. I said, get out, Sarah repeated, her voice stronger now. This is my father's store, and you're not welcome here. Bill Crawford puffed up his chest, trying to look intimidating. Now listen here, young lady. No, you listen. Sarah took a step forward, and something in her posture made all 3 men take a step back. You want to know what happened over there? You want to know why I came home early? Fine, I'll tell you. Sarah, don't, her father said quietly, but she was beyond hearing him now. I was serving in Afghanistan, in a forward operating base near Kandahar, she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. My unit was responsible for training local police forces and providing security for humanitarian missions. The 3 men exchanged glances, suddenly looking less sure of themselves. On March 15th, we were escorting a convoy of medical supplies to a village about 20 kilometers from base. The convoy included 2 female medics who were going to provide care for women and children in the village. Sarah's voice was growing stronger, more controlled. This was the first time she had spoken these words aloud since the debriefings, and something about finally telling the truth was liberating. Our convoy was attacked by insurgents about halfway to the village. We took heavy fire and had to take cover in an abandoned building. During the firefight, I noticed that one of our officers, Lieutenant Colonel Bradley Hayes, had separated the 2 female medics from the rest of the group. She paused, watching the faces of the 3 men. They were listening now, really listening, and she could see the first glimmers of uncertainty in their eyes. I found Lieutenant Colonel Hayes attempting to sexually assault one of the medics, while the other one was forced to watch. Both women were injured, unable to defend themselves properly. The silence in the hardware store was deafening. Outside, Sarah could hear the normal sounds of a Saturday afternoon in Millbrook, children playing, lawnmowers running, life going on as usual. But inside the store, everything had stopped. So I did what any soldier should do, Sarah continued. I stopped him. I pulled him off the medic and told him I would report what I had witnessed. He told me that no one would believe me, that I was just a sergeant and he was a lieutenant colonel. He said he would ruin my career if I said anything. Pastor Williams cleared his throat nervously. But surely you reported it through proper channels. I tried. Sarah cut him off. I filed a report with my commanding officer the next day. But Lieutenant Colonel Hayes got to him first. Suddenly, I was the problem. I was the troublemaker who couldn't follow orders. I was the unstable female soldier who was making wild accusations to get attention. Her father was staring at her with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. The 3 other men looked deeply uncomfortable, as if they were beginning to realize the magnitude of their mistake. The investigation dragged on for months, Sarah continued. During that time, I was ostracized by some of my fellow soldiers. My superiors treated me like I was the criminal. I was transferred to desk duty and told to keep my mouth shut while the army looked into the matter. She rolled up the sleeve of her shirt, revealing the scarred flesh of her left arm for the first time since she'd been home. All 4 men stared at the twisted skin, the evidence of burns and cuts that would never fully heal. These scars didn't come from enemy fire, she said quietly. They came from Lieutenant Colonel Hayes and 2 of his friends, who decided to teach me a lesson about what happens to soldiers who don't know their place. They cornered me in a supply tent one night and used a cigarette lighter and a knife to make sure I understood that my accusations would never see the light of day. The hardware store was so quiet that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. Bill Crawford looked like he was going to be sick. Pastor Williams had gone pale. Jim Martinez was staring at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. But they underestimated me, Sarah continued, rolling her sleeve back down. I documented everything. I took pictures of my injuries, I recorded conversations, and eventually I found other soldiers who had witnessed Hayes's behavior, soldiers who were willing to come forward once they realized they weren't alone. She looked directly at each of the three men in turn. The army tried to keep it quiet, to handle it internally. They offered me an honorable discharge and a disability settlement in exchange for my silence. But I refused, because what happened to me wasn't just about me. It was about every female soldier who has ever been told to keep quiet, to not make waves, to accept abuse as the price of service. The silence stretched on until finally, Bill Crawford mumbled something that might have been an apology and headed for the door. Jim Martinez followed without saying anything at all. Pastor Williams lingered for a moment, looking like he wanted to say something, but ultimately he too left without speaking. Sarah's father waited until the door closed behind them before walking around the counter and pulling his daughter into a fierce hug. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that alone." Sarah held onto her father tightly, feeling like she could finally breathe again after months of holding her breath. "I wasn't alone, Dad. The two medics I protected, I had Captain Torres, my lawyer. I had other soldiers who were brave enough to speak up. And I always had you and Mum, even when I couldn't tell you what was happening." As they stood there in the quiet hardware store, Sarah realized that something fundamental had shifted. She had stopped running from her story and started owning it. She had stopped letting other people define her and started defining herself. But she also knew that this was just the beginning. The real fight was still ahead of her, and it would require more courage than she had ever had to summon before. Word of what happened at the hardware store spread through Millbrook faster than Sarah had expected. By Sunday morning, her phone was ringing constantly. Some of the calls were from reporters who had somehow gotten hold of the story. Others were from townspeople, some apologetic, others still hostile, but all of them wanting to know more. Sarah's mother fielded most of the calls while Sarah and her father sat at the kitchen table, going through the documents Sarah had brought home from her deployment. There were official reports, medical records, photographs of her injuries, and sworn statements from witnesses. "I should have shown you these months ago," Sarah said, sliding a folder across the table to her father. "I was just so tired of talking about it, of reliving it every time someone asked for details." Tom Mitchell opened the folder and began reading. His face grew more grim with each page. When he reached the medical report detailing Sarah's injuries, his hands began to shake. "How could they do this to you?" he whispered. "How could your own people do this?" "Not all of them, Dad. Most of the soldiers I served with were good people doing their best in an impossible situation. But there are bad apples in every organization, and when those bad apples have power, ... double quotes, Sarah shrugged. "It becomes a lot harder to fight back." Linda hung up the phone and joined them at the table. That was Martha Collins from the church. "She wanted to apologize for listening to gossip instead of asking you directly what happened. She also wanted you to know that she's organized a group of ladies to bring us meals for the rest of the week." Sarah smiled for the first time in days. "Mrs. Collins was always kind to me when I was growing up. There are more people like Martha than like Bill Crawford," her mother said firmly. "This town raised you, and most of us remember what kind of person you are." But Sarah knew it wouldn't be that simple. Small towns had long memories, and some people would always prefer the dramatic rumors to the complicated truth. She was prepared for that battle. What she wasn't prepared for was the phone call that came that afternoon. "Is this Sergeant Sarah Mitchell?" The voice was unfamiliar, professional. "This is Sarah Mitchell. I'm no longer active duty, Ms. Mitchell. My name is Jessica Chen, and I'm a producer for 60 Minutes. I've been following your case, and I'd like to talk to you about the possibility of doing a segment on your story." Sarah nearly dropped the phone. "I'm sorry. What? Your story is important, Ms. Mitchell. What you went through, what you're fighting for, it's bigger than just your case. There are dozens of similar cases working their way through the military justice system right now. Your willingness to speak out could help a lot of other people." Sarah looked at her parents, who were watching her with concerned expressions. "I don't know. I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of attention." "Is this Sergeant Sarah Mitchell?" The voice was unfamiliar, professional. "This is Sarah Mitchell. I'm no longer active duty, Ms. Mitchell. My name is Jessica Chen, and I'm a producer for 60 Minutes. I've been following your case, and I'd like to talk to you about the possibility of doing a segment on your story." Sarah nearly dropped the phone. "I'm sorry. What? Your story is important, Ms. Mitchell. What you went through, what you're fighting for, it's bigger than just your case. There are dozens of similar cases working their way through the military justice system right now. Your willingness to speak out could help a lot of other people. Sarah looked at her parents, who were watching her with concerned expressions. I don't know. I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of attention. I understand your hesitation, Jessica Chen continued, but you should know that Lieutenant Colonel Hayes and his attorneys are already working to control the narrative. They're claiming that you're an unstable soldier who fabricated the assault allegations to cover up your own misconduct. If you don't tell your side of the story, they'll be the only ones talking. That evening, Sarah called Captain Torres for the first time since she'd been home. Sergeant Mitchell. Torres's voice was filled with relief. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. How are you holding up? I've been better, Sarah admitted. But I'm ready to fight now. I'm ready to do whatever it takes to make sure Hayes and his friends face justice. That's what I wanted to hear. The preliminary hearing is scheduled for next month, and your testimony will be crucial. But Sarah, you should know that Hayes' legal team is going to try to destroy your credibility. They're going to dig into your past, your mental health, everything they can find. Let them try, Sarah said firmly. I have nothing to hide. There's something else, Torres continued. The two medics you protected, they want to testify on your behalf. They're willing to go public with their stories if it helps your case. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Specialist Maria Santos and Corporal Jennifer Kim had been through enough without having to relive their trauma in a public courtroom, but their willingness to stand up for her meant everything. What about the other soldiers who witnessed Hayes' behavior? Are any of them willing to come forward? 3 so far, Torres replied, and I think there will be more once the story becomes public. A lot of people have been waiting for someone brave enough to take the first step. After she hung up, Sarah found her parents in the living room, watching the evening news. She sat down between them on the couch and took their hands. I need to tell you something, she said. I've been asked to do an interview with 60 Minutes, to tell my story on national television. Her mother squeezed her hand. What do you want to do? I think I need to do it, Sarah said slowly. Not just for me, but for all the other soldiers who are too scared to speak up. For Maria and Jennifer, for every woman who has ever been told to keep quiet about abuse. Her father nodded. And we'll support you, whatever you decide. It's going to get messy, Sarah warned them. Once this story goes national, there will be reporters here, cameras, people taking sides. Are you ready for that, honey? Her mother said with a smile. We've been ready for that since the day you decided to serve your country. We're proud of you then, and we're proud of you now. The next morning, Sarah called Jessica Chen back and agreed to the interview. They scheduled it for the following week, which would give Sarah time to prepare and give the 60 Minutes team time to gather additional information about the case. As word of the upcoming interview spread through Millbrook, Sarah noticed a shift in how people treated her. The hostile stares began to be replaced by nods of support. People who had crossed the street to avoid her began stopping to say hello. Mrs. Henderson, the neighborhood gossip who had started much of the trouble, knocked on the door with a homemade casserole and a mumbled apology, but not everyone was supportive. Sarah received several more anonymous notes, and someone spray-painted Leah on the side of her father's hardware store. Her parents took these incidents in stride, but Sarah could see the toll it was taking on them. Maybe I should call off the interview, she told her mother one evening as they cleaned the graffiti off the store wall. I don't want you and Dad to suffer because of my decisions. Sarah Elizabeth Michelle, her mother said sternly. Don't you dare back down now. Your father and I didn't raise a quitter, and we're not about to let you become one now. This is bigger than our family. This is about doing what's right. As Sarah scrubbed the last of the paint off the brick wall, she realized her mother was right. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every soldier who had ever been silenced, every victim who had been told their truth didn't matter, every person who had been told to accept injustice for the sake of keeping the peace. The interview was scheduled for the coming Thursday. Sarah had 5 days to prepare to tell her story to the entire country, 5 days to get ready for the fight of her life. But for the first time since she'd come home, she felt ready for that fight. The 60 Minutes crew arrived in Millbrook on a Wednesday afternoon, bringing with them a flurry of activity that the small town hadn't seen since the state championship football game 3 years earlier. Sarah watched from her bedroom window as they unloaded equipment from their van, setting up cameras and lights in the town square. Jessica Chen was younger than Sarah had expected, maybe in her early 30s, with an intensity that reminded Sarah of some of the officers she'd served under. She came to the house that evening to go over the questions and prepare Sarah for what to expect. I want you to know that this won't be easy, Jessica said as they sat in the Mitchell family living Rune will be asking you to relive some very difficult experiences. If you need to stop at any time, just say so. Sarah nodded. I've been reliving it every day for months anyway. At least this time, it might actually help someone. We've been in contact with Captain Torres and with the 2 medics you protected, Jessica continued. They've agreed to be interviewed as well, though their segments will be filmed separately for security reasons. We've also spoken with several experts on military sexual assault and 3 other soldiers who have come forward with similar experiences involving Lieutenant Colonel Hayes. Sarah's eyes widened. 3 others. Yes. Your courage in speaking out has encouraged other victims to come forward. That's the power of telling your story, Sarah. It gives other people permission to tell theirs. The interview was scheduled for Thursday morning at the Millbrook Community Center, the only building in town large enough to accommodate the equipment and crew. Sarah arrived early, wearing a simple blue dress her mother had helped her pick out. She wanted to look professional but approachable, strong but not intimidating. As the crew made final adjustments to the lighting and camera angles, Sarah noticed that a small crowd had gathered outside the community center. Some held signs of support, "We believe Sarah, and thank you for your service." Others held signs with less friendly messages. Police officers from the county sheriff's department stood by to keep the peace. "Are you ready?" Jessica asked, taking her place across from Sarah. Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. For the first time in months, she felt completely ready. The interview began with basic questions about Sarah's background, her decision to join the army, and her service record. Sarah relaxed as she talked about her love for her country and her pride in serving alongside dedicated soldiers who put their lives on the line every day. Then Jessica began asking about the events of March 15th. Sarah told her story clearly and calmly, describing the convoy, the attack, and what she had witnessed in that abandoned building. She spoke about her decision to intervene, her attempts to report the assault through proper channels, and the retaliation she faced as a result. "Can you show us the scars you mentioned?" Jessica asked gently. Sarah hesitated for just a moment, then rolled up her sleeve. The camera zoomed in on the twisted flesh of her left arm, the permanent reminders of what had been done to her for trying to do the right thing. "These weren't inflicted by enemy combatants," she said quietly. "These were inflicted by fellow American soldiers who wanted to silence me." Jessica leaned forward. "What do you want people to understand about your decision to come forward?" Sarah looked directly into the camera. "I want people to understand that this isn't about me wanting attention or trying to get revenge. This is about preventing what happened to me and to Specialist Santos and Corporal Kim from happening to other soldiers. This is about holding people accountable regardless of their rank or position." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I also want people to understand that the majority of soldiers I served with were honorable people doing their best in difficult circumstances. This isn't an attack on the military as an institution. This is about cleaning up the military and making it the honorable organization it's supposed to be." The interview continued for over an hour, covering Sarah's experiences during the investigation, her decision to refuse the Army's settlement offer, and her hopes for the upcoming court-martial. "What would you say to other soldiers who might be facing similar situations?" Jessica asked. "I would say that you're not alone," Sarah replied. "I would say that your truth matters, and that there are people who will believe you and support you. But most importantly, I would say that speaking up is worth it, even when it's hard. Even when people don't believe you at first. Even when it costs you everything." When the interview was over, Sarah felt drained but oddly peaceful. She had told her story completely and honestly for the first time, and she had done it in a way that honored both her own experience and the experiences of other victims. Jessica Chen shook her hand warmly. "Thank you for your courage, Sarah. This story is going to help a lot of people." As the 60 Minutes crew packed up their equipment, Sarah noticed that the crowd outside had grown larger. But now the signs of support far outnumbered the hostile ones. Several veterans from the local VFW post had arrived, standing in silent solidarity. A group of women from various churches held hands in a prayer circle. Sarah's parents met her at the community center entrance, both of them with tears in their eyes. "We're so proud of you," her mother whispered, hugging her tightly. As they walked to their car, an elderly woman approached them. Sarah recognized her as Mrs. Patterson, who had taught 4th grade at Millbrook Elementary for 40 years before retiring. "Sarah, honey," Mrs. Patterson said, "I want you to know that I remember you as a little girl. You were always the one who stood up for the kids who were being picked on. You were always the one who told the truth, even when it got you in trouble. That little girl grew up to be exactly the woman she was supposed to be." That evening, Sarah's phone rang constantly with calls from reporters, veterans advocacy groups, and other survivors of military sexual assault. Captain Torres called to tell her that 2 more soldiers had come forward with accusations against Lieutenant Colonel Hayes since news of the interview had broken. "This is exactly what we hoped would happen," Torres said. "Your courage is creating a ripple effect." The 60-minute segment was scheduled to air the following Sunday. Sarah spent the week trying to prepare for what would happen next, but nothing could have prepared her for the response. The segment opened with footage of Sarah in her army uniform, looking young and proud at her graduation from basic training. Then it cut to her sitting in the community center, older and marked by experience, telling her story with quiet dignity. The producers had done their homework. They included statements from military experts about the prevalence of sexual assault in the armed forces. They showed documents proving that Lieutenant Colonel Hayes had faced similar accusations before, accusations that had been buried by his superiors. They interviewed Maria Santos and Jennifer Kim, who spoke powerfully about Sarah's intervention and the trauma they had endured. But the most powerful moment came at the end, when Sarah spoke directly to the camera about why she had chosen to come forward. "I could have taken the army's settlement and disappeared," she said. "I could have kept quiet and tried to rebuild my life in private. But silence only protects the perpetrators. Silence only allows the abuse to continue. Someone has to speak up, and if it has to be me, then I'm willing to be that person." Within hours of the segment airing, Sarah's story had gone viral on social media. #JusticeForSarah began trending on Twitter. News outlets across the country picked up the story. Congressional representatives called for investigations into the military's handling of sexual assault cases. But more importantly to Sarah, her phone began ringing with calls from other survivors, women and men who had served in the military and faced similar abuse. People who had been silenced for years and were finally finding their voices. One call particularly moved her. It was from a young soldier currently serving overseas. "Ma'am," the voice said, "I saw your interview. I wanted to thank you. Something similar happened to me last month, and I was afraid to report it. But after seeing you speak out, I found the courage to come forward. My commanding officer believed me, and the investigation is already underway." Sarah hung up the phone with tears streaming down her face. This was why she had done it. This was why all the pain and struggle had been worth it. But she also knew that the hardest part was still ahead. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes and his legal team would fight back hard against the publicity. The court-martial was still weeks away, and there would be more attempts to discredit her and silence her story. As Sarah looked out her bedroom window at the quiet streets of Millbrook, she realized that she was no longer the same person who had come home 3 months ago, broken and ashamed. She was a fighter now, and she was ready for whatever came next. The court-martial of Lieutenant Colonel Bradley Hayes began on a cold Tuesday morning in November at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Sarah had spent the previous night in a hotel room with her parents and Captain Torres, going over her testimony one final time. Remember, Torres had told her Hayes's defense team is going to try to make this about your mental state, your reliability as a witness. Stay calm, stick to the facts, and don't let them rattle you. Sarah nodded, but she felt more prepared than nervous. The month since the 60 Minutes interview had changed her in fundamental ways. She had received thousands of letters and emails from supporters, many of them fellow veterans who shared similar stories. She had testified before a congressional subcommittee investigating military sexual assault. She had become, almost without realizing it, the face of a movement for change. The courtroom was packed with reporters, military personnel, and supporters. Sarah saw Maria Santos and Jennifer Kim sitting with their families in the gallery, both women having flown in specifically to attend the trial. Several members of Congress were present, as were representatives from veterans advocacy groups. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes sat at the defense table in his dress uniform, looking every inch the decorated officer he had once been. He was older than Sarah had remembered, maybe in his late 40s, with graying hair and cold blue eyes. When he looked at her, his expression was one of pure contempt. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They presented medical evidence of Sarah's injuries, photographs of the burns and cuts that would never fully heal. They played recordings Sarah had secretly made of conversations with her superiors. Conversations that clearly showed the Army's initial attempts to cover up the assault. Maria Santos took the stand on the second day, describing in clear, strong words what Lieutenant Colonel Hayes had done to her and what Sarah had risked to protect her. Jennifer Kim followed, corroborating every detail of Maria's testimony. Sergeant Mitchell saved my life that day, Jennifer said, looking directly at the jury of military officers. Not just physically, but in every way that mattered. She showed me that someone cared enough to fight for us, even when it cost her everything. The defense's strategy was exactly what Captain Torres had predicted. They attacked Sarah's credibility, suggesting that she had fabricated the assault allegations to cover up her own misconduct. They brought in a military psychiatrist who testified that Sarah showed signs of post-traumatic stress disorder that could affect her memory and judgment. But their case fell apart when the prosecution presented testimony from the 3 other soldiers who had come forward with similar accusations against Hayes. Each woman told a remarkably similar story of assault and retaliation, creating a pattern that was impossible to dismiss. The final blow came when the prosecution played a recording that Sarah had made during one of Hayes's disciplinary sessions. The euphemistic term he had used for the torture sessions designed to silence her. On the recording, Hayes's voice was clearly audible, threatening Sarah and describing in graphic detail what would happen to her if she continued to spread lies about him. Sarah took the stand on the 4th day of the trial. She had prepared for this moment for months, but as she sat in the witness chair and looked out at the packed courtroom, she felt the weight of everyone who was counting on her to tell the truth. The prosecution's questions were straightforward, allowing Sarah to tell her story in her own words. She spoke clearly and calmly, describing what she had witnessed, what she had endured, and why she had chosen to come forward. The cross-examination was brutal. Hayes's defense attorney, a colonel named Morrison, spent hours trying to poke holes in Sarah's story, suggesting that she had fabricated the assault to get attention, that her injuries were self-inflicted. She was an unstable soldier looking for an easy way out of the military. But Sarah had been through too much to be intimidated by legal theatrics. When Morrison suggested that she had made up the assault allegations, she calmly asked him to explain the medical evidence. When he implied that she was mentally unstable, she pointed out that multiple independent witnesses had corroborated her account. The turning point came when Morrison made the mistake of asking Sarah why she hadn't simply accepted the Army's settlement offer and moved on with her life. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the faces in the courtroom, at Maria and Jennifer, at her parents, at the reporters and advocates who had made her story their own. Because accepting that settlement would have meant that what happened to me didn't matter, she said finally. It would have meant that Maria Santos and Jennifer Kim didn't deserve justice. It would have meant that every other soldier who might face similar abuse in the future didn't deserve protection. She looked directly at Lieutenant Colonel Hayes as she continued. I didn't survive what I survived just to keep quiet about it. I survived it to make sure it never happens to anyone else. The courtroom was completely silent as Sarah stepped down from the witness stand. Even some of the reporters had tears in their eyes. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous: guilty on all charges, including sexual assault, assault and battery, conduct unbecoming an officer, and obstruction of justice. Lieutenant Colonel Bradley Hayes was sentenced to 20 years in military prison, dismissal from the Army, and forfeiture of all pay and benefits. The 3 other soldiers who had participated in Sarah's torture received sentences ranging from 5 to 10 years. As the sentences were read, Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions: relief that justice had finally been served, satisfaction that Hayes would never be able to hurt another soldier, but also sadness for all the time and pain that could have been avoided if the system had worked properly from the beginning. Outside the courthouse, Sarah was surrounded by reporters and supporters. She made a brief statement thanking the prosecutors, the jury, and everyone who had supported her throughout the process. This verdict doesn't just represent justice for me, she said. It represents hope for every soldier who has ever been afraid to speak up, every victim who has ever been told their truth doesn't matter. The military is supposed to be a place where we protect each other, where we have each other's backs. Today's verdict is a step toward making that promise a reality. 6 months later, Sarah was back in Millbrook, but everything had changed. She had enrolled in college using her GI Bill benefits, studying social work with a focus on helping veterans transition back to civilian life. She had started a non-profit organization to support survivors of military sexual assault, and she had found peace with her past in a way she had never expected. The town of Millbrook had changed to the same people who had whispered about her and demanded that she leave now spoke of her with pride. The mayor had declared a Sarah Mitchell Day to honor her courage. Her father's hardware store displayed a prominent sign: "Proud father of Sarah Mitchell, American hero." But perhaps the most meaningful change was the letters Sarah continued to receive from soldiers around the world, young men and women who had found the courage to report abuse because of her example, officers who had committed to creating safer environments for their troops, survivors who had found their own voices because she had shown them it was possible to speak up and be heard. On a warm spring evening, Sarah sat on her front porch with her parents, watching the sun set over the quiet streets of her hometown. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Maria Santos, who was now working as a nurse in Denver. Saw the news about your nonprofit getting federal funding. So proud of you, you're still saving lives. Sarah smiled and put the phone aside. She looked at her left arm where the scars had faded but would never disappear completely. For so long, those scars had been a source of shame and pain. Now she saw them differently, as evidence of what she had survived. Proof of her strength, marks of honor earned in the fight for justice. The scars told her story, and it was a story worth telling. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Sarah Mitchell, soldier, survivor, and hero, knew that she had found her way home at last, not just to Millbrook, but to herself, to her truth, and to the knowledge that sometimes the greatest courage comes not from fighting enemies on distant battlefields, but from standing up and speaking out when everything and everyone around you is telling you to stay silent. She had refused to stay silent, and in doing so, she had changed not just her own life, but the lives of countless others who would never have to suffer alone the way she had. The scars that had once marked her as a victim now marked her as a survivor, and that, Sarah knew, made all the difference in the world.